can the minimum wage be described as compulsory unemployment? I think we'll let John, if you want to take this one first, and then move forward with that. Second question.
Yeah, well, no. Clearly not in my opinion. I mean, I think what we've had here is just some stereotypes or fallacies here. And maybe what has been described on this panel is not the case today, was the case maybe 10 years or in the late 90s, where teenagers and those in their early 20s were primarily those making minimum wage. That's no longer the case. The economy has changed, especially in Michigan when manufacturing collapsed and unskilled workers were pushed out of tool and die shops and into Walmart and Lowe's and Home Depot and McDonald's. The average age of a person working at a fast food place is not 18, it's 28. 2/3 of those folks are women who disproportionately raise children alone. I mean, we could talk about theories and what blackboard economics is. My constituents, I look them in the face, and they're struggling. So the bottom 60% of working Americans today earn less than they did 13 years ago, in 2000. While those 60%, their productivity has increased by 25%. So they're working and producing 25% more. Though their wages have not even come close to keeping up with inflation. If we were to say that increasing the minimum wage hurts the ability for teenagers or those to get jobs in minimum wage, then if we eliminated minimum wage altogether, would we have full employment amongst those who are in high school or just out of high school? The inverse isn't true here. So that, clearly is not at least what's happening in practicality. I agree that the EITC is something that is a very effective tool in combating poverty. But this governor and this previous legislature cut that significantly. And it's not free money. These are, when I hear that term, it makes my blood boil. Free money is such a misnomer. People are working for that money. It's a wage. If you don't work, you don't get paid. And so, I realize I didn't really quite answer the second question other than a one-word answer, but I think we should get away from the stereotypes of what the minimum wage once was. In 2013, going into 2014, many more adults are making that wage. Skilled trades, working on the line at Chrysler or Ford, they're making $14 an hour. That's what the new contract says with the UAW. So, this gentleman here.
So far you've really focused on the sort of the unemployment aspect, but I feel like there's more than just that. If you raise the minimum wage rates for people at McDonald's, how is that going to impact the price of the foods at McDonald's? Because as one of these gentlemen up here stated, that price is going to get passed along. And something else with regard to income inequality, which is I think sort of the basis of this discussion. What about the tax code? Why isn't that something that's being looked at as a reform to combat income inequality? And then what about the policies of the Federal Reserve to have that inflation every year, so that money that they made, the $3 or whatever back in the 60s, if it had gone with inflation, it'd be $15. So there's a lot more. I feel like that's a lot more nuances than just you raise it and there's unemployment. There's a lot more stuff that goes into it. That's.
I think you bring up a lot of things, which I think Professor Murphy kind of talked on a little bit, so I should extend on that. I know you talked earlier about the minimum wage for teenagers not being the main issue and everything, so just if you want to lead up on Stephen's questions.
I thought you had a lot of questions.
Yeah, sorry,
I
think.
I'll let somebody else.
Okay, let's start out with the one we're supposed to answer. Is it compulsory unemployment? Yeah, it is. Good professor at the end admitted, well, okay, maybe it helps the greater good, but a small number of people may get disemployed, but what the heck, it helps everybody. Well, to those small number of people, maybe they're the teenagers trying to get a job, maybe they're the people on the line that got forced out, and why do we want to force them out of Walmart like we got forced out of Chrysler? Well, to say, well, the greater good is the greater good, and is to get a few, break a few eggs to get the omelet, I don't find that a persuasive argument. It clearly disemploys people. To say that there's, well, blackboards, does anybody use blackboards anymore? I think we still have those.
No, we have document projectors.
Document projectors. We use in fact, your cousin taught me how to use PowerPoint. It's great. See, we can all learn, even at an advanced age. Of course it is. Of course it is, because when you raise the price of something, you drop off at the margins. And that's the unemployment end of it. Is McDonald's going to then raise the price of their hamburgers? Well, let's say they do, so that they can give it to their workers. But Burger King doesn't do it, or they do. What about others? You've got all kinds of competition, including packing your own lunch. You're not going to go to McDonald's. And yes, competition does exist. Now, your problem here, moving on, is we use a tax code. The dreaded 1% pay an inordinate amount. I've heard a lot of figures, but they pay more than 1% in taxes. You want to hit them more? Fine. Talk about what people do when you tax the money away and they can't spend it on themselves or their business. They can't. Before they take McDonald's, they cut into their profit margin. Okay, because profit is evil, but what do they use to expand their business? What do they use if they have another shift? Rather than make you work 1.5, we'll get by with the guys. We won't hire anybody new. We'll just get it out of the current labor force because we can't afford it. You're seeing that play out, by the way, with some of the Affordable Care Act requirements. That rather than raise the price, they're going below the ceiling unemployment. It's a disemployment matter. You got to watch out using the tax code, because anything less than you pay X amount of money, you should pay Y in taxes on a percentage. You start using that to nudge it in the right direction. It creates different constituencies. It creates distortions. People start doing things they wouldn't normally do so that they can get the tax write-off. And you get a whole industry based on the distortions in the tax code. Then when you try to fix it up, it becomes a problem. So you got to watch out for that. I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm just saying that is a cost using the tax code for social engineering. And, maybe it's something you should do. Who knows? Income inequality. What would it cost the Lions to get a couple of decent players where they could do what they did to the Chicago Bears every game? Yes, I know they beat the Bears, and then they're going to lose the Astros. I mean, the bottom line is that this alliance, it'll break your heart. Take my advice, people. Do not get into alliance. It will just break your heart every year. But if they can get a line like the New York Yankees or the pre-salary cap revenues, what is that worth? These are, but it's inequality. I mean, why should, let's go back to the old days, Iserman make more than Joe Schmo? There are inequalities. They're going to exist unless you want to now take control of what people get paid. You can do that. It'll be a very different country than it is now. And finally, going into the, what was the last question? The costs. How does a business model work when you unilaterally come from the government and say you will pay more for factory production? And that's what labor is. You got to look at it. It's the good economists would call it. You start to make people want to get by with less. And yeah, if the tool of raising the minimum wage is so that people can have more money and spend more money, which is a good thing, why is it a good thing that some workers now will get it, and the ones that get laid off, or by the way, don't get hired? That's hard to compute. So, gee, I was going to expand, but I can't because I got to pay more. So I'm just going to get by with the 10 guys I got. I'm not going to hire 2 more. Those are 2 people.
I've been reading this results from available on the internet, and I would say that there's a lot of unemployment to be caused. The estimates say that 1% or 0. And what puzzles me is why conservatives can be very realists about the minimum wage, which they simply don't like, and not realists about this 7.5% in the nation that are unemployed. That doesn't seem to bother them. And, but see, how can companies, in theory, adjust without laying off a bunch of people? And the data here says people are getting very low effects on, very small effects on unemployment, or zero effects on unemployment. I try to figure that out, and they say one of the things is, and you don't understand this, they say you get less turnover. Like, in fact, we used to have the theory of the efficiency wage. You get higher wages.
Who's talking about that too?
Henry Ford paid higher wages, and he had less turnover. They worked well. And so that's one of the reasons.
Henry Ford paid higher wages, by the way, a lot of people don't know, it was 1915. And in 1915, Europe was burning up in World War I. And part of that, it did all the other things that it did. That the workers got more money, they were able to spend, and the Michigan economy got better. And no one argues with that. But the rest of the world was essentially burning itself up in World War I. And Henry Ford wanted to produce stuff and keep it all going. So but the point about the minimum wage that Henry Ford put in was not that he did it out of the goodness of his heart, because Henry Ford wasn't known for doing anything out of the goodness of his heart, because although he did it, he certainly improved our lives, but I don't know that he had any goodness in his heart. Your problem here is that it made economic sense for him to pay that wage. He wanted to get more workers, he wanted a special supply of workers, he wanted to keep them there, because he had contracts to get out, because there was now no competition in Britain or Germany or France. They were all killing each other off. So it made economic sense to do that. It wasn't the government said, you will do it against his will. Understand, if it doesn't make economic sense in the end, which means that the supply equals demand, if you speak in $10, you can't spend 12, sooner or later, it's not going to work, whether it's a government or whether it's a business, or whether it's a payroll.
To hit your question, I'll open up the students.
Just a comment. I think Sherman, I sympathize with Sherman. The real issue gets to our students' favorite topics in basic economics, elasticities of demand, supply, and deadweight loss. With inelastic demands and supplies, the deadweight loss is less. The impact on unemployment is relatively small, and the potential impact on equity and poverty is larger. It's largely an empirical issue. And, as far as using the market mechanism, I can provide you with tons of examples. Here at Oakland University, do we use the market mechanism to allocate parking spaces, to use tuition, to allocate course slots and other things? There are limits to the market mechanism. There are trade-offs, and we have to, at times, consider those trade-offs.
You're a professor?
Yes.
Teacher. What do you teach?
Economics.
Economics.
Yeah.
Great.
This is the economics class.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just came here. I got invited. I teach political science.
Yeah.
Oh, it is an economics too. Yeah. It's good to talk about the inelasticities. That's true. But Oakland University is not a closed system. And if Oakland University, the cost of Oakland University, if you will, gets too high, people won't go here. It will not be the bargain that it frankly is. They'll do other things. I understand the competition for parking spaces. I did that when I came in here. That's more the survival of the fittest in the state of nature. Man's permission short. But it wasn't short for me. I did it too long. You have first come, first served. The university is not in any way, though, a model of the real world, if you will, by reality, empiricism, whatever. You can do that, but in an economy where there's a shortage, where more people want to come in, I don't know that you can use the model of the college, or maybe you can. We can talk about income inequality between, say, professors and the poor lowly adjuncts. I don't even know if I'm worth what they're paying as it is. But if they were to say, we adjuncts, geez, guys like me, I'm an adjunct instructor, I'm the low bottom of the heap here. I want to get paid as much as these guys because it's not equal, you know. They could do that, but it would be at the cost of raising the tuition to the point where you guys couldn't afford to do it. It would cost the same as in Harvard or whatever. And there's not even any guarantee that I'm worth it. Hell, I don't even know that I'm worth what you're paying me now. So the bottom line here is that to use the university as a model it's got its issues. And I understand about the elasticities in demand, but right now the economy's bad. It's been bad for 5 years. The demand for young workers, we do know, inexperienced workers, marginal workers, even workers who just came off the line from Chrysler, and they're really good at doing what they did at Chrysler, or they're really good at whatever their trade was in factory. You're not seeing a lot of plumbers, by the way, or people in housing, they're not getting working at Walmart, let me tell you. Still, they're still marginal workers till they learn the ropes. I mean, I understand it's a good discussion.
For the sake of time, you have a question?
Yes. I was wondering what kind of empirical studies there were for the elasticity of demand for labor in the long run versus the short run, if there were any.
There's tons of books have been written. You know, off the top of my head, the short run elasticity ballpark figures about minus 0.3, and the long run's about minus 1.0. 10% wage increase will reduce employment by 10%. In other words,
This
in
is
the
off
long
the
run.
envelope. That came right out of your head.
Well, I am a labor economist, so.
You know, all of a sudden, in the long run, they're all gonna lose their jobs. I never seen that.
What, 100% wage increase, that might happen.
What do you mean the 10% will lose their jobs if you have a 10%? But the entire economy is not being paid the minimum wage. Or 10% of...
He asked what the long run elasticity was, and the studies show it's about -1, which is a 1% increase results in a 1% reduction. Again, I didn't, that's, I'll show you in the textbook. In fact, that's our next chapter.
Roddy, go ahead if you have a question.
I'm not refuting you because I agree with you, but right now that would be like moving, I think it's, what, 745 to like 760. In the long run, that would cause 10% lose their jobs.
It's not a 10% rate increase.
Oh, 760.
Yeah.
It would be 745 to 820.
Thank you. Be about 8. I mean, really, like 10% will lose their jobs.
A 10% increase, yeah. So if the wage goes up, other things being equal, what do employers do? They switch to more capital-intensive production methods. They may outsource or offshore the work. There are long-run responses. And again, I didn't do the studies. The studies are out there.
Just Kevin, just to clarify, you're talking about equal percentage reduction in total employment, or those who were previously employed at the minimum wage rate? That's a very different impact.
The question was the labor demand elasticity, not the
For the
elasticity
entire,
of the
okay, so
minimum wage.
that's pretty substantial. Is there,
Let's do
yep.
What
Question
about
for students.
disparate impacts, like on either on a regional basis or like for certain cities such as Detroit, which one of the highest, as a city, one of the highest unemployment rates? Is there likely to be a disparate impact on places with even more severely undereducated and under? In other words, a 10% impact may be all in areas or individuals who are not in this high demand labor force, or it may be more scaled across the board. Is there any empirical?
I'm having a hard time following what we're talking about. We're talking about raising the minimum wage, or
Yes, the impact of a minimum wage, if that impact will be more heavily concentrated on either
which ones?
lower income individuals or less skilled regions.
Yeah, so I think his question is precisely, if we're playing with the 10% with the -1 elasticity level, if we have an increase in minimum wage by 70 cents, as Wyatt suggested, wouldn't it be a 10% unemployment decrease on the less educated or less skilled workers more directly, or would it be just overall?
We'll do it back at the end. How about that? We'll do my guess, and this is just a stupid wild ass guess here, is that these changes are felt at the margins. And in the city of Detroit, I don't know. I don't know how, whether they have, if you have the degree of unemployment there, does it get soaked up? Who knows? I do know that you will see where these changes will be at the margins, where the less productive, the newer, the less experienced employees will either A, not get hired, which is more likely what you'll see. You'll see no workforce expansion, or you let them go. You know, will it be uniform across the country? No. Will it be uniform across all groups? No.
I think the question that really comes up after this full discussion is that does increasing minimum wage target the inequality that we face, or does it just reduce the unemployment level? And are we willing to sacrifice one without it for it? What do you guys think as student body? You know,
Well, wait a minute, it doesn't reduce unemployment. If anything, it would increase unemployment, or you could argue it doesn't have any effect at all. But the question I think you really want to ask is how much impact does it have on poverty and inequality, raising the minimum wage? But, you know, I heard John say something before. You know, I get this. In this state, one thought is to raise the minimum wage as an anti-poverty measure just because, you know, the current political climate is such that it's about the only thing that there might be any hope for. So I think that goes back to the point I made earlier, is that what we really need is more demand and, you know, more policy that will help expand the economy. And so how do we get that? And are you arguing that, you know, as a second best, all we can hope for is perhaps to get a minimum wage increase through, given the current state of affairs?
Well, I think that it's unlikely that minimum wage would legislatively get through. I'm not sure if that's something that would happen on the ballot or not. I think if that was placed on the ballot, I think it would have a much higher likelihood of getting passed by referendum than the legislature. But I mean, this is the gentleman's point, is that, I mean, we're talking about what some really small part of a much larger issue of income inequality, how this country has, the economy has changed considerably, how wealth has migrated up considerably in the last 30 years. And it's not just that wages. I mean, it's a disinvestment in education. It's you know, lack of investment in social safety net. It's healthcare insurance costs. I mean, it is so many different things. It's monetary policy that it would be nice to have the minimum wage, but it's not a cure-all by any sense.
Right, that's not going to solve the poverty problem.
It would help.
Would it?
Don't you count this stuff, the reports of this empirical studies? Not count at all?
Well, I think there you're talking about the employment effects, and even Blackboard economics. Well, sure, one diagram you might draw, you raise the minimum wage, that creates additional excess supply and raises the unemployment rate. But there are other Blackboard economics models which suggest the effect on employment per se is relatively small. But, you know, nevertheless, I go back to the unemployment rates that you see for teenagers on the order of 23%, 38%. What is that caused by? Is that an equilibrium sort of search unemployment number?
Black teenagers have a higher unemployment because of racial discrimination. It's obvious to me.
Black teenagers are not the only ones looking for work. They're white teenagers also. They should be the same percentage of black.
Speak louder.
There should be the same percentage of black to white teenagers as there are black to white workers in general.
Yeah. Just take the overall number. It's 23%. How is that like a normal amount of search unemployment?
Here's what John says, though. Good idea. It says, suppose we drop minimum wages entirely. Did that all go away? You're right?
There are other employment costs other than minimum wage that can't be altered. Obamacare not the least of them.
Right?
Well, I'm just saying, that was the argument that was made.
Yeah. The argument is, we don't want to drop the minimum wage entirely. You can understand it on a theoretical basis, you know. But even in your own argument, you've admitted that raising it would have some costs and disemploy some people. But that the greater good, of course, would be served by it. I understand that. But wait, hold on. I'm not done, sir. Is that you still have to admit that when you raise the price of labor, you're going to cause some fall off at the margins unless you know, all things being equal, you do it, say, 1996, when you can't find anybody, or in the middle of World War II, when you can't find anybody. I understand that those external conditions make, you know, the inelasticity of labor, if you will. That's too high a price to pay. If you lower the minimum wage with somebody who says, geez, I need someone to help sweep out my store. I live in Detroit. You seem like a nice guy. Why don't you come help me? Could maybe do that, which are how things happen. You know, things happened in the, you know, back in the old days. I don't know. Is there a price point where we clearly, and I think it's been demonstrated, we're clearly pricing marginal workers out. And by marginal, I'm not talking about whether marginal. I'm talking about at the margins of the economically, at the margin, in terms of either experience or whatever. Is it we're clearly pricing them out, and when you raise it up, you price more out. Now, if you lower that, how many more come in? How many more people get that first job? Or if they're forced out of Chrysler, the job they need to keep their families fed. This is a good, and this is a social good. And I think that's as much a social good as by fiat raising the price of labor at the costs that we know we do. And you can see the correlation. I don't know, studies and studies and studies. We'll go back to the Bureau of Labor. Now I'm looking at the rise in the minimum wage and the rise of youth unemployment, but that also coincided with the crash. Minimum wage jobs anywhere. So, yeah.
For the sake of time, students, it is 1 o'clock, so if you do have to go to class, go for it, but we will stick around and the panel will continue written.